I bought my retirement home in silence. The ink dried on the closing documents on a rainy Tuesday morning, and neither my son nor his wife had the slightest clue. For 3 years since my husband passed away, David and Sarah had lived rent-free in my 4-bedroom house in the Seattle suburbs. They framed it as a temporary setup to save for their own place. Instead, Sarah treated my home like a hotel where she was the manager, and I was the aging guest who had overstayed her welcome. The final straw dropped a month prior. I walked into my own kitchen to find Sarah measuring the bay windows. She turned, barely acknowledging my presence. "My parents are retiring next spring," she announced, jotting down numbers in a notebook. "We're thinking the guest room downstairs will be perfect for them. You won't mind moving your sewing stuff into the basement, right? It just makes sense for the family." She didn't ask. She informed me. David sat at the island, staring at his phone, completely mute. He had always been a leaf blowing in whatever direction Sarah's wind blew. I looked at the two of them, taking in the sheer audacity of the assumption. I didn't yell. I didn't cry or throw a fit about disrespect. I just poured my coffee, nodded slowly, and walked out to the patio. That afternoon, I called a real estate agent. I found a beautiful 2-bedroom condo on the 4th floor of a secure building downtown. It had a balcony facing the water, a strict access policy, and most importantly, it was mine. I quietly arranged to sell the suburban house to a cash buyer. I packed away my valuables in small batches, storing them in the trunk of my car, and moving them to the new place, piece by piece. I refused to be a spectator in my own life. If they wanted the house for Sarah's parents, they could buy it from the new owners. I waited until the final week before closing to break the news. Sunday dinner had become a chore. I dreaded, mostly consisting of Sarah complaining about my cooking and David chewing in silence. I waited until Sarah pushed her half-eaten plate away before sliding 2 printed envelopes across the table. "What's this?" David frowned, picking one up. "A 30-day notice." I replied calmly, sipping my water. "The house is sold. The new owners take possession at the end of next month. You have until then to find a new place." Sarah's fork clattered loudly against her plate. Her face flushed a deep, blotchy red. "You sold our house, without discussing it with us." "I sold my house," I corrected smoothly. "The one holding my name on the deed. I've already purchased a condo downtown. I'll be out by next weekend." "But my parents," Sarah snapped, her voice rising an octave. "They're expecting to move in here." "We had a plan, Julia. How could you be so selfish? Where are we supposed to go?" "You both have full-time jobs and 3 years of saved rent." I pointed out, resting my hands on the table. "I suggest you start looking at apartments." David finally found his voice. "Mom, downtown a condo. That's going to be so small. What about when we want to visit, or when we have kids? It has exactly enough space for me," I answered, standing up to clear my dishes. Sarah stormed out of this dining room, slamming the front door so hard the framed pictures in the hallway rattled. David trailed after her, muttering weak apologies to the air. I simply loaded the dishwasher. The heavy knot that had sat in my chest for 3 years suddenly felt remarkably light. I had drawn my line in the sand, and stepping over it felt like breathing fresh air for the first time in a decade. Moving into the condo was the easiest thing I had ever done. The space felt perfect. I had a small galley kitchen, a cozy living room with a view of the harbor, and a second bedroom I converted into a reading room. The building required an electronic key fob to enter the lobby, use the elevator, and access the amenities. I felt entirely secure. However, I made one mistake out of residual maternal habit. David showed up alone on my second weekend there. He brought a wilted houseplant and a sheepish expression. He apologized for Sarah's outburst, blaming it on work stress. We sat on the balcony, and for an hour, he sounded like the sweet boy I had raised. When he asked to use the restroom, I thought nothing of it. I had left my purse on the kitchen counter. My spare emergency key fob hung on a small hook inside it. I didn't notice it was missing until 3 days later. When I texted David about it, his reply came back instantly. Yeah. I grabbed it just in case of an emergency. Thought it would be safer if I had a spare, since you live alone now. I'll give it back next time I see you. I stared at the screen. I should have driven to his apartment right then and demanded it back. But I had a flight to catch the next morning. My sister in Florida had invited me for a 2-week visit, my first real vacation in years. I figured I would simply retrieve the fob when I returned. After all, David knew I would be out of state. The condo would just sit empty. I packed my bags, activated my indoor motion sensor cameras, a small purchase I made for peace of mind when traveling, and caught my flight. The Florida sun felt wonderful. For the first 5 days, I didn't think about Sarah, David, or the spare key. Then, on the 6th afternoon, my phone buzzed with a motion alert from my living room camera. I sat on my sister's lanai, shielding my phone screen from the glaring sun. I tapped the notification, expecting to see maintenance staff checking the fire alarms. The video feed loaded. My blood turned to ice. Sarah stood in the middle of my living room, her hands on her hips, directing traffic. 2 men I recognized as her father and brother were hauling a heavy leather sofa through my front door. David trailed behind them, carrying 2 large cardboard boxes. I watched the live feed in absolute silence. Sarah pointed toward my reading room. Her father nodded and began shoving my antique bookshelf out into the hallway to make room. They weren't just visiting. They were moving in. My sister noticed my stiff posture and walked over. Julia, what's wrong? I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just felt a cold, sharp clarity wash over me. They think I'm gone for 2 weeks. I murmured, my eyes locked on the screen as Sarah casually opened my refrigerator and pulled out my iced tea. They think they can just claim my space. David had clearly handed over the spare fob. Sarah must have assumed that once her parents were physically entrenched in my second bedroom, I would be too polite or too worn down to kick them out upon my return. It was a classic squatter's play, relying entirely on my lifelong habit of avoiding confrontation. She severely underestimated the woman she was dealing with. I need to book a flight back, I told my sister, closing the app. Tonight. I didn't call David. A phone call would only give them time to fabricate excuses or dig their heels in. I packed my suitcase with calm precision. I double-checked my digital folder containing my property deed, my ID, and the building management contacts. I was done negotiating with people who treated my kindness as a weakness. The flight back to Seattle felt surprisingly short. I didn't sleep, but I wasn't anxious. I spent the hours mentally cataloging every financial tie I still had to my son. There was the shared phone plan, the emergency credit card I let him keep for car repairs, the car insurance policy I had never bothered to take his name off of. By the time the plane touched down, I had drafted a meticulous list. I landed at 6:00 a.m. I didn't go straight home. I sat in an airport coffee shop with my laptop and systematically cut every cord. I removed his access to the credit card. I separated the phone lines. I canceled his auto insurance coverage under my account. If he wanted to act like the man of a household, he could pay for it. At 8:30 a.m., I caught a taxi to my building. When I pulled up, I saw a small rental moving truck parked illegally in the loading zone. Sarah's father was standing by the open back doors, smoking a cigarette and organizing a stack of framed family portraits. Their family portraits. I paid. The driver grabbed my suitcase and walked straight past him without a glance. I entered the lobby. The morning concierge, a sharp-eyed woman named Maria, looked up in surprise. "Mrs. Gardner, I thought you were away until the 20th. Plans changed, Maria," I replied smoothly. "Can you confirm who authorized the move-in upstairs?" Maria frowned, checking her screen. Your daughter-in-law. She said you offered the spare room to her parents while their new house closes and that they had your key. I see. I pulled out my phone. I bought my retirement home in silence. When I came back, my DIL's family was moving in while I was away. That's when I called building security and the police. Maria, please send the head of security up to Unit 412, I requested softly. I have intruders. I stood in the hallway outside my own door. 2 building security guards flanked me looking tense. A single, non-emergency police officer, whom I had requested merely to keep the peace and oversee the removal of trespassers, stood behind us. I slid my key into the lock, turned it, and pushed the door open. Laughter drifted from the kitchen. Sarah was at my stove cooking eggs. Her mother sat at my kitchen island. David was on the sofa scrolling through his phone. What do you mean she won't notice? David's voice drifted over. Mom is going to freak out Sarah. She'll get over it, Sarah scoffed, flipping an egg. She's alone in this big place. Once my parents are settled, she won't have the heart to kick them out. We just need to stand our ground. You won't have to worry about my heart, I announced, stepping fully into the entryway. David jumped off the sofa, his phone clattering to the floor. Sarah spun around, dropping the spatula. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water as she took in my presence, followed immediately by the sight of the uniform-clad men behind me. Mom! David choked out, his face draining of color. You're supposed to be in Florida, and you are supposed to be in your own apartment, I countered, walking over to the island. Pack your things, all of it. You have exactly 1 hour to clear your boxes out of my home before they go into the dumpster. Julia, be reasonable, Sarah's mother gasped, clutching her chest. We're family. You have extra space. This is my property, I stated clearly, turning to Sarah. Hand over the fob. Now. Sarah's eyes darted toward the officer standing near the door. Her confident facade crumbled, replaced by panicked rage. You called the cops on your own family. Are you insane? I called them on trespassers, I corrected. The fob, Sarah. David dug frantically into his pocket and pulled out the small gray plastic fob. He held it out with shaking hands. Mom, I'm so sorry, he stammered. Sarah just... She said her parents' lease ended early and they had nowhere to go. I didn't want to upset you on your trip. I took the fob from his palm, offering him no comfort. You didn't want to upset me, so you helped them break into my home. That's not an apology, David. That's cowardice. I turned my back on him and looked at Sarah. She was fuming, grabbing her purse from my counter. You are the most bitter, selfish woman I have ever met, she hissed. My parents have nowhere to go. You're choosing an empty room over your own family. If you do this, you will never see us again. We are done. It was supposed to be a threat. A weapon she thought would bring me to my knees. I picked up the dropped spatula and set it in the sink. Make sure you wipe down the stove before you leave. I replied, my voice perfectly steady. For the next hour, I sat on my balcony with a cup of coffee while they frantically dragged their boxes and furniture back out the front door. The security guards stood by, ensuring nothing of mine was taken or damaged. I didn't lift a finger to help. I didn't offer to pay for a hotel. I simply watched the boats on the water, listening to the grunts and heavy footsteps fading down the hallway. When the door finally clicked shut, I stood up, walked to the entryway, and engaged the deadbolt. The silence that fell over the condo wasn't lonely. It was magnificent. By noon the next day, the building management had completely reprogrammed the electronic locks on my door and issued me a new, highly encrypted fob. I ensured David and Sarah were permanently added to the building's Do Not Admit list at the concierge desk. My phone blew up for 3 days straight. Sarah sent paragraphs of vitriol calling me every name she could think of. David sent long, rambling voice notes. He begged for forgiveness, He claimed Sarah had forced his hand. Then reality hit him. Mom, my credit card was declined at the grocery store, and my phone says it's disconnected from the network. Please call me back. We need to talk about this. I didn't call back. I texted him a single brief message. You are an adult, David. You and your wife can manage your own expenses. Do not come to my building. I blocked Sarah's number entirely. It wasn't a punishment meant to teach them a lesson so they would come crawling back. I had spent my entire adult life buffering David from the consequences of his actions and buffering myself from Sarah's blatant disrespect. I was finally done. I didn't want apologies. I wanted peace. My neighbor, an elegant retired teacher named Helen, knocked on my door that Thursday. She handed me a plate of warm muffins. Saw the commotion earlier this week. She noted her eyes crinkling with quiet understanding. Just wanted to make sure the coast was clear. I accepted the plate with a genuine smile. The coast is perfectly clear, Helen. Care for some tea? 2 weeks later, the intercom in my kitchen buzzed loudly. I walked over and pressed the video button. Sarah's face appeared on the small screen. She was standing in the lobby, holding a bakery box, wearing an overly bright, unnatural smile. Hi, Julia. Her voice crackled through the speaker. I brought your favorite pastries. We really need to talk. Can you buzz me up? Let's just sit down and hash this out, like family. She assumed time had softened me. She assumed the silent treatment was a tactic, a negotiation tactic to get an apology rather than a permanent door shutting. I leaned closer to the microphone. Leave the box at the desk, if you like, Sarah. You are not coming upstairs. Her fake smile vanished instantly, replaced by a hard glare. Julia, stop being stubborn. David is miserable. We're struggling without that card. I'm willing to forgive you for kicking my parents out if we can just reset. I almost laughed at the sheer delusion of her phrasing. She was willing to forgive me. There is no reset, I answered calmly. You tried to take over my home. You stole my peace of mind. You don't get access to my life or my finances ever again. Have a good afternoon. I took my finger off the button, cutting the connection. I watched the screen for a moment as she argued with the concierge, pointing aggressively at the camera. Eventually, security approached her, and she turned on her heel and marched out the glass doors. I didn't feel a shred of guilt. I walked back into my reading room, picked up my novel, and settled into my armchair. The lock on my front door felt like a warm embrace. It has been 8 months since that day. The seasons changed, washing the city in crisp autumn colors, then burying it in winter snow, and finally opening up into a bright, breezy spring. I started a local watercolor painting class. I joined a book club with Helen and 2 other women from my floor. My days belong entirely to me. David calls me once a month. I answer sometimes. The conversations are brief, superficial, and polite. He tells me about his job. I tell him about my paintings. He never mentions Sarah, and I never ask. He learned quickly that pushing for a reunion would result in me hanging up the phone. The dynamic has shifted completely. I am no longer his safety net, and in a strange way, he sounds a little more grounded because of it. I never received an apology from Sarah, nor did I expect one. She operates in a world where she is always the victim of someone else's boundaries. Let her live there. I sit on my balcony this morning, both hands wrapped around a warm mug of coffee. The city is waking up below me. Delivery trucks rumble down the avenue, and seagulls call out over the harbor. I look at the empty chair across from me. It doesn't represent loneliness. It represents space. Space I earned. Space I protected. I spent 60 years compromising my comfort to accommodate everyone else. I learned the hard way that if you don't fiercely protect your own sanctuary, someone will always try to move their boxes into it. I took a sip of my coffee, feeling the warm sun on my face. My home is quiet. My doors are locked. And for the first time in my life, I have absolutely nothing left to prove. Looking back, the biggest lesson I took from all of this wasn't just about changing the locks on a door. It was about changing the lock on my own life. For decades, I truly believed that being a good mother and a good wife meant always making space for everyone else, even if it meant shrinking my own. I thought being necessary was the same thing as being respected. But peace of mind isn't a retirement gift anyone hands you. It's something you have to claim for yourself. Setting a firm boundary doesn't mean you don't love your family. It just means you finally realized that you are allowed to love yourself too. You don't owe anyone your sanctuary. If my story resonated with you today, or if you've ever had to draw a hard line to protect your own peace, I would love to hear about it down in the comments. It takes a lot of courage to stand up for yourself, and sharing our experiences reminds us that we aren't alone. Please don't forget to hit that like button, and if you haven't already subscribed to the channel for more stories like this one. Thank you so much for spending part of your day with me, and I'll see you in the next video.